Her own father said she wasn't worth a single coin. The cowboy reached into his coat and paid anyway. New Mexico Territory, in the burning summer of 1884, the little plaza village of San Ysidro sat baking on the banks of the Pecos, all adobe and dust and the white glare of noon, and it was there, in the shade of the cantina wall, that Eli Caldwell first saw the woman the whole valley called cursed. He had come down out of the high country for wire and coffee and nothing else. Eli Caldwell was a lean, weathered man of 38, quiet the way a man gets quiet who has learned that talking rarely improved a thing, and he carried the war still in the stiff seam of scar tissue down his left forearm and in the deeper places that did not show. He kept to himself on 400 hard acres up the canyon, where the only sure spring in that dry country ran cold out of the rock, and he had not meant to stop for anything in San Ysidro that day. But a crowd had gathered in the plaza, the ugly idle crowd that gathers for a spectacle, and against the cantina wall a broken old man was shouting, and Eli reined in to see what the shouting was about. The old man was Paloma Reyes, and he was drunk, and he had his daughter by the wrist. "Take her." Tom's was crying, in Spanish and then in ragged English for the Anglos at the edge of the crowd, hauling the young woman forward as though she were a heifer he could not feed through the winter. "She is cursed, Maldita, everything she touches dies. Her mother, dead bearing her. Her brothers, dead. My crops, my luck, all dead. Take her free, any man, take her for nothing and go. Only get her out of my sight before she buries me too." The young woman did not weep, and she did not fight, and that was the thing that caught Eli Caldwell and would not let him go. She stood in her father's grip in a faded dress the color of the dust, a woman of perhaps 22, and she kept her eyes fixed on the middle distance, with a stillness that was not calm but its far side, the stillness of someone who has been shamed so many times that shame has finally run out of anywhere new to cut. The crowd laughed, or crossed themselves, or looked away. No one stepped forward. A cursed woman offered free is still a cursed woman, and there was not a soul in that plaza who would carry such luck home for the taking. Eli swung down off his horse. The crowd quieted, the way crowds do when a stranger enters the ring. He walked up to Paloma Reyes, and he looked once at the young woman, long enough to see that her eyes, when they flicked to him, were dark and quick and entirely aware, taking his measure the way a person measures the next blow. And then he reached into his coat. "I don't take a person for free," Eli said. His voice was low, and it did not hurry. Never heard of luck came out of a thing got for nothing. He counted coins into his own palm, silver, and the crowd leaned to see. "What's a season's cook and wash worth in this valley? $20? I'll pay you 30, Reyes, honest coin for honest hire, and you'll say the word before all these people that it was a fair wage paid and not a thing given away." He held the man's bloodshot eyes. "Say it." Paloma Reyes stared at the silver as though it might be another curse. "You are a fool," he whispered. "She will bury you." "Maybe." Eli pressed the coins into the old man's shaking hand and closed the fingers over them himself. "Say it fair. It is a fair wage," Tom's mumbled, to the crowd, to no one. "Paid fair." And then, because grief and drink had hollowed the man out until there was nothing left in him but the need to be rid of what he could not bear to look at, he let go of his daughter's wrist and turned and pushed away through the crowd, and did not once look back at her, and that, not the auction, not the word cursed, but her own father's back walking away without a backward glance, was the thing the young woman flinched from at last, a small flinch, quickly mastered. Eli Caldwell took off his hat, which no man in that plaza had thought to do, and he held it in his hands like a man at a church door. "Ma'am," he said, "I've got a wagon and a long road up the canyon, and I'd be obliged for your company on it. But that's yours to say, not mine. I bought a wage today. I didn't buy you." He waited. The plaza held its breath, and after a long moment the young woman looked at the hat in his rough hands, and at the empty place in the crowd where her father had gone, and she made the only choice left to a person who has been given none. She chose the stranger over the men who had laughed, and she climbed up into the wagon herself, unassisted, and sat with her spine straight and her hands folded, and waited to see what kind of man had paid full price for a curse. They rode up the canyon in the long gold light of evening, and it was on that ride, the narrator will tell you, that the audience of her own heart first began to wonder about Eli Caldwell, for he did not speak to fill the silence, and he did not look at her the way men look, and when the wagon jolted, he put out a hand to steady the water jug and not the woman, leaving her the whole of her own body to govern as she pleased. The Caldwell place, when they came to it in the last of the light, was a small scarred thing, a low adobe house, a pole corral, a barn patched with whatever the years had provided, and behind it, up against the red rock, the dark gleam of the spring that made 400 dry acres worth having. Eli watered the horses and lit a lamp and set out cold beans and tortillas he had bought in town, and he ate his own portion standing, so that she might have the table to herself. She had not said a word. He had begun to understand that she was not going to. When the meal was done, he set something on the table in front of her. A single silver dollar, bright in the lamplight. "That one's yours," Eli said. "Not wages. Yours, first thing I want understood under this roof." He nodded at it. "A person that can't leave ain't staying, they're just caught. So there's the price of a stage seat to anywhere, and my word that no man on this place will lift a hand to stop you walking to it. You keep that coin where you can feel it. Any morning you want gone, you're gone, and no shame in it." He straightened. "I sleep in the barn. Bars on the inside of that door. You throw it tonight and every night, and you sleep knowing there's not a thing in this world can come through it." He set his hat on. "Your name's your own to give or keep. I'll not ask twice." She looked at the coin a long time. She did not touch it. But when he had gone out to the barn and pulled the door to behind him, Eli heard, after a while, the small sound of a bar being thrown, and then, a longer while after that, a sound he had not been expecting, the scrape of the coin being picked up off the table. She had not spent it. She had only, at last, taken it in her hand. The days that followed built into something Eli Caldwell had no name for and had stopped believing was owed to him. She could not be kept from work. Work was the only language she had left, and she spoke it fluently. She scoured the neglected house until the adobe glowed. She found the ruin of a kitchen garden behind the barn and brought it back to life with cuttings and a knowledge of dry country planting that Eli, who had killed every tomato he ever set, watched with plain wonder. But it was on the fourth morning that he learned what she truly was. His old cow horse, Ranger, had torn a leg on wire and gone lame and hot with the wound, and Eli had resigned himself to shooting a good animal, and the woman stepped past him into the corral, quiet and knelt in the dust by that nervous horse, as though she had all the time in the world, and did a thing with crushed leaves from her garden and a cloth and a low, wordless hum in her throat. And by the third day the swelling was gone, and the horse was sound. "You're a healer," Eli said, watching her wrap the leg a final time. It was not a question. She looked up at him. And for the first time since the plaza, something moved behind her dark eyes that was not braced for a blow. She did not speak, but she inclined her head once, yes, and went back to her rapping, and Eli understood he had been led a single step nearer. He began to notice her the way a man notices the weather turning, the way she never let her back face a door, the way she set his plate down and stepped back out of arm's reach before he could reach for it, an old habit worn deep, as though a hand extended toward her had only ever meant one thing. The way she flinched, still, on the days he came around the barn's blind corner, and she had not marked him, flinched, and then went furious still with herself for the flinching. He took to whistling low when he came near, some tuneless thing, so that she would always hear him coming and never again have to be startled in her own yard, and he never once told her why he did it, and she never once let on that she knew. But the whistling went on, every day, and it was the truest sentence that passed between them for a long while. There was an evening a norther blew through cold and sudden, and she came out onto the porch to pull the wash off the line, and Eli, coming up from the spring, saw her shivering, and took his own coat off, and held it out to her at arm's length, not draping it around her, only offering it on the flat of his hand, hers to take or not. She looked at the coat, and at him, a long, careful moment. Then she took it. Her fingers did not touch his, but she wore it back into the house, and hung it by the fire, and in the morning it was brushed clean, and mended at the cuff where the war had frayed it, and neither of them said a word about the warmth that had passed between two people who had each learned to expect only cold. It was on the 9th night that Eli Caldwell learned the woman he sheltered was no one's victim, and had never been. He had ridden to town that day and come home troubled. Harlan Voss, the big cattleman who ran the lower valley, had made him an offer for the spring, friendly on its face and iron underneath, and when Eli refused, Voss had smiled a beat too long and said the valley was talking about the cursed woman up the Caldwell Canyon, and that talk had a way of turning to trouble, and a wise man sold before the trouble came to him. Eli said none of this aloud, but when he rose to clear his plate, the woman was standing at the table with a stub of pencil and the brown paper the tortillas had come wrapped in, and she pushed it toward him, and on it, in a clear schooled hand that no one in that valley would ever have credited to the mute-cursed girl, she had written 3 lines. He does not want your curse gone. He wants your water. He will use the first to take the second. Do not sell, and do not turn your back on him in the dark. Eli Caldwell read it twice. Then he looked up at her, and the woman looked back at him, level and unafraid, and he understood all at once how badly the whole valley had misjudged her, that she had stood mute in 100 rooms and been taken for simple, when in truth she had been listening the entire time, missing nothing, reading men the way she read a fevered horse, that the silence was not emptiness, but a locked door, and behind it was someone sharp and whole and watching. You can read, he said, and write a better hand than the schoolmaster. A slow thing happened at the corner of his mouth that was nearly a smile. You've been 3 steps ahead of me since San Ysidro, haven't you? She did not smile back, but she did not look away either, and that was its own kind of answer. Before the trouble came up the Caldwell Canyon, and it would, soon enough, there was one more quiet week, the garden greening and the horse sound, and a low tuneless whistle crossing the yard each morning, so that a woman need never again be startled in her own home. If you have stayed with this story so far, stay a little longer. What happens next is the part that changes everything, and if tales of love that outlast the hardest country the West could offer are the kind that keep you company, the small bell beneath this story is how we go on meeting like this. Harlan Voss came up the canyon on a bright Sunday with 6 mounted men and a preacher, which is how a certain kind of man makes cruelty look like community. Eli was mending corral poles when they rode in, and the woman went still at the garden fence, and Voss sat his big horse in the center of the yard and spoke loud enough for his men to hear and carry. Caldwell, we come neighborly, so hear me neighborly. Voss was broad and prosperous and sure, a man the valley elected to things. There's sickness in the low pastures, 3 of my calves dead this week, and the Pruitt baby took with fever, and folk are saying it started when you carried that woman up here. Now I'm not a superstitious man. He smiled. But a whole valley believing a thing is its own kind of true, and the valley believes she's cursed, and the valley wants her gone. Send her back to her people. Sell me the spring at a fair price so a steadier hand can water this land, and you can stay on and ranch in peace with your neighbors. Refuse, and you'll find out how cold a valley can turn on a man who keeps a curse over its head. That's not a threat. That's just weather. I'm telling you which way the wind sets. And here was the moment the whole thing turned. For everything Voss offered was the easy road, and every man there could see Eli weighing it, and the woman at the fence had already begun, out of 5 years of hard habit, to gather herself to be sent away again, because being sent away was the one thing the world had never once failed to do to her. Eli Caldwell set down his hammer and walked out to the middle of his own yard. Her name's her own, and I don't know it yet, Eli said, because she hasn't chose to give it, and that's her right, same as it's her right to sleep under my roof as long as she cares to. You want to talk about curses, Voss, you go ahead. I fought a war. I have seen what men do to each other with no help from the devil at all, and I have never once seen a curse do 1/10 of the harm done in this life by a greedy man with a smile on him. His voice never rose, and it was the more terrible for it. The water's not for sale, not at a fair price, not at any price. And she stays. You've had your say. Now ride off my land and take your preacher, and the next man that comes up this canyon meaning to lay a hand on that woman had best come better mounted than he plans to leave. Voss looked at him a long moment, and the smile thinned to something truer and uglier. You'll wish you'd sold, he said, and wheeled his horse, and led his men and his borrowed preacher back down the canyon. And Eli stood in the settling dust and did not turn around, because he could hear behind him the sound of the woman breathing strangely, and he thought she might want a moment to have her face to herself. She did not thank him. She had no words to thank him with, and would not have used them if she had. But that night, when he came in from seeing to the horses, she had taken his other coat, the good one, the one he wore to town, and turned the frayed collar and set new buttons on it in small, fierce stitches, working by firelight long past when she might have slept. Because it was the only way she had to say the thing there were no signs for. He stood in the doorway and watched her sew a man's worth back into a worn-out coat, and something in Eli Caldwell that the war had shut came quietly open. Her whole story came out 3 nights later, by the spring, and it came out in her own voice. They had walked up to the water at dusk, the 2 of them, the way they had fallen into doing, and the frogs were starting, and the first stars stood over the red rock, and Eli was saying low that he did not believe in curses, when the woman beside him said, in a voice rough and rusted from long disuse, the first words he had ever heard her speak, "My mother died the night I was born." Eli went very still, the way a man goes still when a wild thing comes to his hand and he dares not spook it. They told me it my whole life, she went on, her eyes on the dark water. The midwife said the baby took the mother. Then my brother drowned in the acequia when I was 7, and I had been minding him, and my father looked at me across his grave, and I watched him decide. Then the drought came, and the fever came, and every time God took a thing from that village they had already agreed whose fault it was. Maldita, the cursed girl. By the time I was grown, there was not a person in the world who touched me if they could help it. Her hands lay still in her lap. I stopped speaking at 15. I had learned that whatever I said, they had already decided what I was, and I would not spend my breath on people who had stopped their ears. Silence was the only thing that was mine. Silence, and the little I know of healing that my grandmother taught me before the village frightened her into her grave. She turned and looked at him then, full on, in the starlight. "You paid $30 for a curse, Mr. Caldwell, in front of the whole plaza. Do you know what my father truly sold you? Nothing. There is no curse. There is only a girl the whole world found it convenient to blame, and a man, too, broken by grief to love what was left to him. That is the whole of it. I am not sorry for the deaths. I did not cause them. It has taken me 22 years to say that plainly, and I said it first to you. For a moment the only sound was the water. Then Eli Caldwell told her the thing he had never told a living soul. "I was at Sand Creek," he said, 18 and 64. I rode in with the volunteers thinking we were soldiers, and I watched what we did to a camp of Cheyenne that had already surrendered. Women, children, old men under a white flag and a Union flag both, and I did not stop it, because I was a boy and afraid, and I have never in 20 years been able to unsee a single hour of it. I came home and I could not sit in a church or look my own people in the face, and they knew something was wrong with me, and they were glad enough when I drifted west and quit troubling them. He looked at the water, not at her. So when a man in a plaza said the word cursed, I reckon I knew something about being marked for a thing and cast out for it. I know what it is to be the one the decent folk cross the street from. I have been carrying my own curse a long time, and it is realer than yours, because I earned mine. And you never earned a thing but the cruelty of small people. He made himself meet her eyes. That's why I paid full price. A thing you get for nothing, you never learn the worth of. I wanted you to see, from the first hour, that somebody in this world had counted you dear. That's all it ever was." The woman looked at him, and the last of the wall behind her dark eyes came down, and she said, very low, the second gift she had to give, "Paloma. My name is Paloma." "Paloma," Eli said, trying it, and the name in his rough voice was a thing she had never once heard hers be, spoken gently. When she crossed the little distance between them and he brought his hand up to the side of her face, careful as a man cups a struck match against the wind, the kiss was brief, and it asked nothing, and what broke open in Paloma was not desire but its rarer cousin, the plain astonishment of being touched only in tenderness by hands that had every reason the world calls good to have thrown her away, and had not. Harlan Voss came back for the water on a moonless night, as men like him do, with fire. He came with the same 6 riders, and no preacher this time, because cruelty needs no witness at night, and the first Eli knew of it was the barn going up in a roar of orange, and the horses screaming, and he ran out into it in his shirt with his rifle, and took a bullet through the shoulder before he ever saw the man who fired. He went down hard in the yard between the burning barn and the house, and through the pane he saw the riders spreading to fire the house next, and Voss himself swinging down to cut the corral and take the horses, and this, the narrator will tell you plainly, was the moment such stories so often truly ended out on that hard ground, with a good man bleeding in the dirt, and a greedy man taking what the night let him take, But Harlan Voss had made the same mistake the whole valley made. He had taken Paloma Reyes for a curse to be frightened of, and never once for a woman to be feared. She came out of the house not fleeing but low and fast, and she had Eli's spare rifle, and she did not scream, and she did not waste a word. She put a round through the water trough beside the nearest rider's horse, so the animal reared and near through him, and into the dirt at the feet of the next, steady, unhurried. A woman who had spent 5 years being told she brought death, and had decided this once to aim it. And then she did the thing that ended Harlan Voss, and she did it with her voice, the voice the valley had never heard, lifted now so it carried down the canyon in the firelight. Harlan Voss. She cried, "You tell your men why you truly came, not for any curse, for the spring. He means to fire this ranch and blame the cursed woman, and take the only sure water in the valley while you all cross yourselves and look away. Ask him. Ask him whose calves he poisoned himself to make you afraid. You are not burning out a curse tonight, you are stealing water for Harlan Voss, and you will hang for it the same as him when the truth is told." And the truth, once spoken plainly in a carrying voice, did what fire could not. The riders were valley men, not killers, gathered on a superstition and a lie, and one by one in the leaping light they looked from the burning barn to the wounded man in the dirt to the greedy fear on Harlan Voss's face, and they saw it. They saw the whole ugly shape of it at once. And the Pruitt boy's own father was among them. The same Pruitt whose feverish baby Paloma had slipped down the canyon to doctor in secret a week before, the child now cool and mending, and it was Pruitt who turned his horse across Voss's path and said, low and sick, "She saved my Sam. God forgive me. She saved my boy while you had me believing she'd killed him." One by one Voss's men fell back from him, until Harlan Voss sat alone in the firelight, with his lie stripped off him in front of every neighbor he had meant to rule, which for a man like Voss was a death more final than the rope that later came for him. They put out the fire, all of them, the men who had come to set it. And Paloma was already on her knees in the dust, with her hands pressed to the hole in Eli Caldwell's shoulder, keeping the life in him by main force, and there she stayed. The fever took him 3 days. She did not sleep through any of them. She packed the wound with the knowledge her grandmother had died for, and she brought him clean through the crisis, and on the 3rd night, when it broke at last and his eyes cleared, the first thing Eli Caldwell saw was Paloma asleep, sitting up in the chair beside him, with her hand still closed around his, keeping her watch even in sleep, the way she had once kept her silence, and in her other hand, on its worn thong, the single silver dollar he had given her the first night, that she had carried every day since and never once spent, because a stage seat to anywhere had stopped, somewhere in those weeks, being a thing she wanted. By the following spring the barn stood new raised, pine still pale and smelling of sap, because the valley men who had come up the canyon that burning night came back in daylight with hammers and mortar and shamed, careful kindness, the way frontier people do when they have finally decided whose side the truth is on. The spring ran cold and clear, and stayed the Caldwells, for Harlan Voss went east in irons to answer for arson and attempted murder and the poisoning of his own stock, and the good coat of his reputation did not save him. The Pruitt baby grew fat and well, and other folk began, quietly at first and then openly, to walk up the Caldwell Canyon when the fever or the birthing or the broken bone came, because it turned out the valley had wanted a healer all along, and it only needed to be cured of its own fear first. Eli and Paloma were married at the spring in the green of that spring, by a circuit preacher who was not the one Voss had borrowed, with the Pruitts and half the valley standing witness, and Paloma wore the mended coat's owner on her arm and said her vows in the voice she no longer kept locked away. She wore no ring that day. She wore, on its worn thong at her throat, the single silver dollar, and when the preacher asked was there a token, Eli took it up in his rough fingers and held it to the light for all of them to see. Her own father said she wasn't worth a coin. He told the valley, "Plain, I've come to think she's worth more than the whole of it, and everything under it, and the water besides. But we'll keep the dollar. It's the truest thing I own. It's the day somebody counted her dear." They kept it on the mantel after, the bright silver coin, where the morning light found it first, and on the worst days and the best, Paloma Caldwell would take it down and turn it in her fingers and remember the plaza, and the hat held in a stranger's rough hands, and the long gold ride up the canyon toward the only home that ever asked nothing of her but that she stay, and then she would set it back in its place, in the house that had a family in it now, and go out to her garden, humming low, the way a woman hums who has finally stopped waiting to be sent away. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where love arrived quiet and refused the discount and paid full price for a soul the whole world had marked down to nothing, then this story was for you. Out on the dry red country of New Mexico, where the pecos run slow and the wind keeps its long memory, the love between Eli Caldwell and Paloma Reyes became the kind that does not need anyone to remember it to be real. He reached into his coat for a woman her own father gave away for free, and he counted out full price in front of them all, because he knew a thing the whole valley had forgotten, that nothing you get for nothing is ever known for what it is worth. If stories of frontier love that endured through hardship, prejudice, and the kind of silence only the West knows speak to something in you, follow the Lonesome Trail for more. Here, the love stories are quiet, the courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail.